Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Phillip F. Nelson, and he wrote a book that was published back in 2018. The title of the book is Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr.? The Case Against Lyndon B. Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover. And this is not his first book. He's also written LBJ The Mastermind of the JFK Assassination, 2013, LBJ From Mastermind to Colossus, 2014. Also, Remember the Liberty, also almost sunk by treason on the high seas, published 2017. And Phillip F. Nelson's website is www.lbjthemasterofdeceit.com. So it's LBJ The Master of Deceit, all one word.com. And you can see his books and material there. But this book I read through, tons of information, very well read, and really goes in detail about the background of Lyndon Baines Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover prior to the assassination of MLK. And Phillip F. Nelson can talk more about that. So, Phillip F. Nelson, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, William. I appreciate the invitation.
Great. Well, I'm delighted that you agreed. Can you talk about your background? I mean, you've written other books kind of around JFK, LBJ. Can you talk about your background and what led you to write Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr.?
Yes, I'd be glad to. If I can, I have to summarize basically about 60 years in this in order to do that. But that's I'll do it.
Take your time. Take your time.
Form.
Cool.
Yes, I basically grew up in Indiana, went to college in Wisconsin, and graduated in 1969, Bachelor of Economics and Business Administration. And upon graduating, I had decided to submit my application to the Peace Corps to see if that might be an alternative to, the other option of going to Vietnam. So they accepted me. I went through the training. I spent time in Brazil, and that's kind of a long story. The program was basically cut short. However, I was there for roughly a year, a little more or less, whatever it was. However, I came back in 1970, just in time to have my number drawn, my lottery number with the draft board, and I lucked out and got a very high number, and therefore, yes, I was one of those people with the deferments. Mm-hmm. At the time, though, I didn't think there was much of an option because I had my own life plan, worked out. And it didn't involve going to Vietnam, and it didn't. Although I did actually plan to consider joining the Air Force, I decided not to do that after all. I like the Peace Corps experience, and I have no regrets from any of that. I began. My doubts in 1961, my doubts about Lyndon Johnson go back to 1961, and I was still in high school. And I think it was a sophomore. Anyway, I on a Monday morning in the middle of February, there was an announcement on the school PA system that there was an airplane crash and down on the LBJ Ranch in Texas, and 2 pilots were killed. But they did say that thankfully the vice president was safe. He was not on board, and so the problem, the immediate problem was they referenced the fact that happened like 4 days before, and now they're just announcing it now. It's like the news was delayed for four days, and I thought there was something a little strange about that. And sure enough, over the next several months and couple of years, the story dribbled out one piece at a time, just little pieces and increments. And then at the end, in 1964, a man named J. Evetts Haley wrote a book, A Texan Looks at Lyndon. This is the middle of the 1964 campaign for the presidency. And there was a very critical look at Lyndon Johnson and his past, and there were inferences made about a series of murders that happened down there, and all kinds of other things that had happened in that book. I'm not going to summarize the book, but it just suffice it to say, it was a very detailed and troubling look at this person who was running for president on the Democratic slate. Now, he had assumed the presidency, of course, just months before in December of 1963, or excuse me, November 22nd of 1963.
Right. So it was right there during that presidential election, right?
Right. Yeah. So it was something that it was weird because that book, at least in Texas and throughout the Southwest, I think it sold a lot of copies, millions of copies.
Can you restate? Sorry to interrupt. Can you restate the title of that book again, please?
Yes, it's called A Texan Looks at Lyndon.
Texan Looks.
And the author was J. Evetts Haley. Now, it was not until then. My point was that this happened in 1961, that airplane accident. You didn't get the full story until that book came out. But there were newspaper articles here and there, but who was looking at all of those? It was mostly a Texas thing, and I wasn't aware of all of these articles that were appearing down there and the investigations and so forth. And then until this book came out in 1964, and so I had a lot of doubts then about the integrity of this fellow, and that sort of sprang me into this whole thing that I had a great interest in for all of those years and beyond, especially during the additional assassinations that would start up after JFK. Of course, we had Malcolm X, and then a couple of years later we had Fred Hampton, and it went on, and then suddenly Martin Luther King was murdered in 1968 in April. 2 months after that, of course, Robert Kennedy was. And I just had a feeling that there was something missing in the Warren Commission report that looked at the JFK assassination and attributed it to, a lone nut, a malcontent.
Right.
And then along comes the other assassinations, and it's the same thing. It was a lone nut, a malcontent that allegedly killed Martin Luther King. And again, in Robert Kennedy's case, it seemed like it was a broken record or something very terribly out of place because of the books that had come out on the JFK assassination, the earliest books, questioning, what really happened. And, the authors there, I'm not going to go through the list, but.
Right. Mark Lane, some of these other guys are very well known, kind of
right.
JFK assassination researchers.
Yeah.
Also.
And there were some other lesser known researchers, Sylvia Mayer and so forth. And anyway, the point is there were a number of books, a lot of questions being raised, and then we have these other assassinations. And so by the end of it, I had pretty much had my fill of Johnson. But then when I got back from the Peace Corps, I decided I really need to get into a career kind of thing. And that's what I did. So for the next 30 years or so, I had to put everything on the shelf of all my interests. I did continue reading books as they came around, but it wasn't until my retirement in 2003 at age 58 that I decided I'm going to try to put some notes together from all those books I had already read, and I'm going to read some more books and see what I can figure out about all this, because the book that I felt should have been written, and when I did all this, and starting in about 2003 or so, I just felt that the book had not been written. Somebody's got to write this book. Right. So by 2007, I decided it had to be me because I didn't see anybody else on the horizon. So that's kind of what I did. Now, I should mention right here that my attention was very much aroused in November of 2003 when 3 additional episodes of the series, the History Channel series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, were introduced in 2003. And of those 3, it was episodes 7, 8, and 9. And it was the number 9 one, the final one, called The Guilty Men really caught my attention, because there a lot of people started talking about very strange things about Lyndon Johnson, that many of which I had never heard or realized.
And that's a very well-made documentary series, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think, and I've always said it was, I believe it was the best video ever of what I believe the assassination was all about. And I've been attacked for a long time because of the use of the word mastermind. LBJ is the mastermind. A lot of people don't agree with that, and I understand why. And it has nothing to do with the dictionary definition of the term. It's their interpretation of what that term means, and invariably people attack me for thinking that LBJ was smart enough to know every detail of this rather extensive conspiracy. That was never the case. In fact, if you look at the dictionary definition, a person who conceives of an idea and is able to muster support among people that he can count on to carry it out, and coordinate those and bring them together, and then become the driving force and supply the momentum for this effort, this plot, whatever you want to call it, right, to go forward. Well, he can be called a mastermind because it was his original idea and concept, and he took the original steps to make it happen. Now, I go back, a lot of people then weigh in with the idea, well, yeah, but he couldn't have really designed all this, which is what they interpret the term to mean. But that's just an incorrect interpretation. And again, just look it up in the dictionary. That's what it says, as I portrayed it.
Right, and he's the chief beneficiary of the death of JFK. Who becomes president is LBJ, right? So
right,
there's a running thing. So yeah,
it does seem simplistic, and if you look at it in an out of context manner, and that's what they generally do. But I believe, I still do, that things that he did back in 1958. Okay, I'm talking about now 5 years before the assassination, even before he was on the ticket.
Right.
He arranged in Texas to change for the Texas legislature to change the law in Texas so that he could run in 1960 on both the national ticket and the state ticket, because his term was coming up for re-election in 1960 as the senator and the majority leader. And so that action basically was what triggered his next steps. And right, and when 1960 rolled around, that was already set, and he was on both the state ticket and the national ticket. Right. But the way he got on the national ticket basically was to want to go on as the vice president, because he knew that he could not win at the top of the ticket as the president,
right,
nomination,
right,
with the presidential nomination. He wanted to be on the vice presidential nomination because, for a number of reasons, but the fact that he knew that he would not have national support, being from Texas, the South, all that, that was his way onto the ticket. But then when he was there, then he felt that, or I believe he planned as early as 1958 to do something to put himself into the presidency before that term expired, and that was to basically assassinate JFK.
To get there, right? But there were suspicious deaths in Texas on his rise up, and he was always saying he wanted to be president. So that was his ultimate goal, correct?
That's right. Yeah, and in fact, he even started saying that when he was a child, when he was 12 years old, playing King of the Mountain with other kids. He declared to them then, so this was in 1920 then, that he would be president someday. And in every case, whenever he had another chance to get that point across, he did. And this is confirmed by none other than Robert Caro. And he stated that. So is Robert Dallek. All of biographers, they're on board with that point.
And Robert Caro is, sorry to interrupt, but Robert Caro is kind of the definitive LBJ biographer, correct?
Yes. I mean,
you mentioned him often through your book. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, it's because he has written some very powerful books. That first book was terrific. It opened my eyes to what he was intrinsically, what the evil within him is pretty well written and described by Robert Caro in that first book. The problem with Caro's books, though, is that in each successive book, he backed off of that. He backed off in steps, so that by the fourth book, he was basically saying that Johnson was completely innocent. He was happened to be there, and he acted boldly and so forth. But the stories, by this point, he had really gone off course in terms of bringing forth truths and objective, descriptions of who Johnson really was, and I could describe them, but I don't think time permits a detailed.
We probably get censored by some of these big tech sites too.
Yeah.
But you show in your book that Johnson had a public image and a private character. Would you agree with that?
Oh yes, right. Well, I mean, a lot of people who worked for him knew all about his mental issues, his occasional psychotic breakdowns. I mean, that all one needs to do to prove that is to read Richard Goodwin's 1988 book, Remembering America, and he spent a whole chapter, a 45-page chapter, discussing that point and basically enumerating a number of occasions which not only he but he's also talking about Bill Moyers had witnessed, and that they were very concerned about his behaviors and so forth. And a lot of times he would wind up so depressed and in this manic cycle he had, this manic depressive, whatever it's called. They call it bipolar now. But basically I'm not sure if he ever, I know he had never been treated for it by a psychiatrist, okay, until after he left the White House, and then he had to get psychiatric help. But I guess he wanted to resist that as long as he could. So anyway, you have that unfolding, and not even coming out until 1988. I mean, this is 25 years after he died. I mean, that's the problem. Right. He existed all this time with all these things going on. According to his partner in defrauding taxpayers down in Texas, Billy Saul Estes, he was responsible for killing up to 17 people in Texas who got in his way or presented, a potential problem for him in his quest for wealth and fame and political power.
And I think even one of those was his sister too, right?
Yes. Right. She was always sort of a thorn in his backside the whole time. I mean, she had her own problems. She was alcoholic and a very promiscuous gal. And oh gosh, I could talk about her for a long time. I want to avoid that. That's all those stories that are in my first book.
Gotcha.
So it extends into the second book as well, of course. The LBJ Mastermind book and the LBJ Colossus book has all of that in probably about a total of about 1,600 pages. Right. So what we want to talk about a little bit more, though, is if we can segue into the Martin Luther King book.
Please do.
Okay, that book is entitled "Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr.? The Case Against Lyndon B. Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover." And I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs that showed up in the Simon & Schuster website on that book.
Okay, great.
Now, actually, the book is published by Skyhorse Publishing, and it's distributed by by Simon and Schuster. Okay, this is what is contained there.
Okay.
In Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr., Phillip Nelson explores the tactics used by the FBI to portray Ray as a Southern racist and stalker of King. He shows that early books on King's death were written for the very purpose of disinforming the American public at the behest of the FBI and CIA, and are filled with proven lies and distortions. As Nelson methodically exposes the original constructed false narrative as the massive deceit that it was, he presents a revised and corrected account in its place, based upon proven facts that exonerate James Earl Ray. Nelson's account is supplemented by several authors, including Harold Weisberg, Mark Lane, Dick Gregory, John Avery Emerson, Philip Melanson, and William F. Pepper. Nelson also posits numerous instances of how government investigators, the FBI originally, then the Department of Justice in 1976, then the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigators in 1978, and the DOJ again in 2000, deliberately avoided pursuing any and all leads which pointed towards Ray's innocence. Okay, now I want to also add there that that book was originally published in 2018. Now in 2020, it was updated with a paperback edition that included a foreword from LBJ researcher Edgar F. Tatro, an educator, author, and participator in the House Select Committee on Assassinations, who is among the first generation of JFK researchers. His unique insights into what he refers to as the Texas Connection are an invaluable resource to anyone wishing to understand the full dimensions of the conspiracy behind the JFK assassination. So that was the most important major revision to the new edition, that forward by Edgar Tatro. Now he goes into just a thumbnail review of some of the most brutal acts against men and women that one could imagine in that new forward. The other significant change, though, was one I added at the other end of the book, as an afterword. I wrote that to explain how James Earl Ray's second attorney, Percy Foreman, whose character will be examined in complete detail in that section, that afterward. But he had gotten involved in his own criminal activity shortly after he swindled Ray into a guilty plea. And that was about something that happened in 1970, where he was in the center of a conspiracy involving other Texas attorneys and two of H.L. Hunt's sons, which resulted in a $100 million civil suit and subsequently converted to criminal charges and another, by the government against all of them. Now that civil suit, whatever happened to that, I can't say, but it was the criminal charge that I wanted to look at. Percy managed to twist his way out of all of that with an apparent attempt in 1976. Okay, 6 years later. In other words, this case just dragged through the courts for 6 years. So then in 1976, the new president, Jimmy Carter, and his attorney general, Griffin Bell, ordered that all charges against Percy be dropped, though none of the others were included in that. The year before, they had all gotten off with a nominal $1,000 fine. In other words, basically the government sort of closed ranks with these lawyers led by Percy Foreman. But Percy Foreman, in a nutshell, I don't want to drag on this one, but he used what he did for the government, for Lyndon Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, in 1969 as a get out of jail free card in 1976. Gotcha. He basically very subtly blackmailed it. And I can't prove this other than the fact that it happened, there's a record that is added to the book of how that was just done, on the spur. And suddenly Griffin Bell wrote a note to the federal judge in Texas to tell him to go ahead and do this, to just dismiss the charges, let him go, all so that he would not have to pay the $1,000 fine. I guess he's a multimillionaire. Okay, Percy Foreman was, but he didn't want any kind of blemishes on his record when he knew he had that get out of jail card free. Why not play it? And that's what he did.
Right. So you had a suspect defense attorney, but a very similar to kind of RFK, where his Sirhan's attorney was engaged in kind of scurrilous behavior. I don't know if you know about that, but there's some questions about that as well. So
exactly, they sort of used both of these attorneys, to pull off what they could otherwise not be able to do.
And it's actually, sorry to interrupt, but it's also the same thing that happened with the killer of Oswald, right? His attorney, I think they said the fix was into Melvin Belli or something like that. Like they knew that it was just a fait accompli.
Right. Now, actually, they had basically won at a hearing or trial, wherever it was, and basically they were going to give him a new trial because they kind of admitted that the other thing had been botched. But in the meantime, he suddenly dies of cancer.
Right.
So, and that was itself a very suspect event.
Just like all these events, there's just all kinds of subterfuge and strange things happening all around these deaths. And
right.
MLK is a perfect example.
Yeah, I want to just make a few points about my book on Martin Luther King's murder.
Please do.
That basically relate to the fact that the FBI, not just Hoover, but his top echelon of people, basically planned the murder for at least I believe, 5 years. In fact, you could argue that that 1 month after the assassination of JFK, all the attention then was turned to what are we going to do about Martin Luther King? And almost precisely 1 month later was actually December the 24th, I believe, or 23rd, I think it was. Whatever, it was a day or two before Christmas. And the FBI had a big meeting in FBI headquarters, including the top echelon people who were running this long-standing thing against Martin Luther King. Were joined by the SAIC's special agents in charge from Atlanta, Birmingham, Memphis, and St. Louis. And there may have been others there, but anyway, they all met there, and the subject at hand was the neutralization of Martin Luther King. Now, on the giving them some measure of benefit of the doubt, it could be argued, well, that was just how to take legal actions to try to hush him up or to try to embarrass him or whatever. But that as everyone knows by now, that was just the window dressing. The fact is that there were efforts made to form this conspiracy as early as 1964, and that is when some of the two of the major operatives here, which the one was Clyde Tolson, who was an assistant, the top level assistant to J. Edgar Hoover. In other words, he was the second man in the hierarchy of things in the FBI.
And his lover too, right? He was Hoover's
lover. Right.
Yeah,
it was. They were not just friends and buddies, but they were lovers and whatever else they might have done. But these guys were just riding high at this point. They were taking these, expensive vacations in California and Florida for weeks at a time, on the government dime, never paid for anything. It was always, oh, we're visiting a FBI office, but they weren't even in the FBI office. But
right, and they expected to be comped on everything too, right?
they were comped on everything, and what the government didn't comp in terms of expenses, their buddies Clinton Murchison and Sid Richardson, oil barons from Texas, were taking care of the rest of their bills, and even giving them money to bet at the Del Mar race track over there in Southern California. So anyway, they were just doing all kinds of things way off the charts. So whatever is going on now in the FBI is nothing compared to what was going on back then.
Right.
Anyway, what I wanted to get to is that the points that I've brought up in my book, which have never been addressed before, had to do with the fact that they actually wanted to avoid having an FBI investigation of Martin Luther King's murder, because it would point right back to them. If they really let their investigators loose, they would find out it would go right back to Washington and the FBI headquarters, top floor. So what they did was set up a series of novelists that would come in and write a story. Now, the original story was supposed to be about a dead assassin, because James Earl Ray was supposed to be murdered right there on the street in his Mustang, right in front of Betsy's rooming house. They had a policeman, one of the dirty cops down in Memphis, ready to shoot him right there. And they had a backup guy who was, if in the event that the policeman didn't show up or didn't get it done, there was a backup guy in place to do that as well. It's all in the book. So here they were. They couldn't have their own FBI agents actually go out and do what needed to be done to explore this. So they essentially relied on these novelists. The first one of which was William Bradford Hewitt. Now, William Bradford Hewitt had been a 20-year friend of Hoover and Toulson. So he was in their clutch.
Right.
And
sorry to interrupt. His last name's spelled Huie. Sorry.
That's right, Huey. And he had written a number of novels. There were also some supposedly true crime books in there, but he had taken such liberties with all of them, you couldn't tell the difference. And when he wrote this book, was supposed to be originally it was supposed to be He Slew the Dreamer. Then when it was published, it was They Slew the Dreamer, in order to get across that there was a conspiracy, but it had nothing to do with the FBI. Of course, it was all these racists down there and the South. Well, anyway, Huey wrote a book that portrayed James Earl Ray as a vicious Southern racist, a hater, stalker, murderer of Martin Luther King, when in fact none of the above was the case. He wasn't even Southern. He grew up in Quincy, Illinois, or thereabouts, in a couple of different towns, Alton, Quincy, so forth. And those towns are actually farther north than Springfield, Illinois, farther north than Indianapolis and Columbus, Ohio. So how can that be considered Southern? So he strikes out there. But yet he actually wrote the words Southern Illinois, okay? As though he was basically very close to the South. And then from there on, he portrayed him as, as a lifelong criminal. And he was up, but yet the facts show that he was just a petty criminal. He was a little thief, and he with other associates would steal things like postal money orders, things like that, and rob supermarkets. That's all he did. And he never really did anything violent other than the fact carry the gun when he was robbing a supermarket. And so he was repeatedly put into prison. But before all that happened in the late 40s and early 1950-51, he was in the military, and he was sent to Germany. And in Germany, as I've mentioned in the book, or detailed in the book, he was subjected to MK Ultra treatment, and basically watched from then on. So he was a known person to the FBI and the CIA, through the CIA, all of that time.
Wow, it's just incredible. I never heard that part of the story that he was an MK Ultra.
Yeah, that was that was actually something that another researcher and author named Lyndon Barston wrote in a book that he wrote with Jerry Ray, that is James's brother.
Right.
And he did an incredible job of that in fleshing out all of that angle. But that's where it stopped in that book until I also borrowed it from him and put it into mine and summarized it. So, but it's a very important piece because it explains so much about what happened when James Earl Ray did escape from that prison. Now, that by the way, we're skipping around here, but yes, so he was in prison for petty crimes, and he did escape. However, it was because of that Clyde Tolson I mentioned had gone out to Missouri or to Memphis and given the this key plotter that, well, his name was Russell Adkins, and he was a figure in Memphis. I mean, he was known to a lot of people, all the politicians and so forth, and everybody knew him either directly or indirectly as the fixer. He could make things happen. Okay, so what I started to say before, and I lost my place, was that in 1964, he and Russell Atkins and Clyde Tolson took a 3.5 month trip, ocean voyage trip on the USS United States, the fastest such ship ever. It still has the record for in 1956 for making a run to Paris, or to France in record time. And anyway, they went on this cruise, and then they spent time in France and England before they sailed it back. So altogether, they were over there 3.5 months. And the reason they did this is because they wanted to be completely focused on what they were doing with regard to this plan. No telephone interruptions, no aides, no nothing, except whoever was bringing around their lunches and dinners and drinks or whatever. So anyway, the point is they spent all that time fleshing out the original plan. So that's why I say that started just months after that meeting in December
64, right?
of 63.
63, and that's right.
63. This is just a month after the JFK assassination. So here, just four or 5 months later, here they are on this ocean voyage dedicated to the idea, and it had to come out of that meeting, maybe as a secret, just between the people who needed to know about this. Right. But that is what happened. So anyway, what happened then later in 1966 was that Clyde Tolson went to Memphis and he gave Russell Atkins this $25,000 for him to get it to the warden of the prison where James Earl Ray was, because they had selected James Earl Ray. He was the guy. Who knows how many other candidates they had, but they knew this guy's in prison and we're going to get him to escape. And that was plan one. That was task one coming out of this meeting. Anyway, that happened. He did escape in 1967. It was I think it was April, and he wound up going to Chicago, working there. And by the way, working in places like a big restaurant up in Evanston, where 75 employees, half of them were black people and others were Mexicans. He got along with everybody. The owners loved him. When he decided he had to move on before the law closed in on him, so to speak, they actually begged him to stay. They didn't want to lose him because he was such a good worker. He was always there on time, did a good job, and he was clean, well behaved. Now Huey comes along, wants to portray him as this violent Southern racist I just mentioned. And that was the objective of his book. However, other people came along, and even people he referenced in his books, like the owners of that restaurant, came forward and said, they thought he was okay. Other people, his other landlords, and Birmingham, Alabama, and Illinois, other places said the same thing. Yet, what Huey wrote about, all of these people didn't conform with what he was saying. He was trying to build a story that he was this dirty unclean and vile, evil person, and none of these people were coming forward with those kind of stories. So everything was kind of out of sync all along the way. Well, the other thing that Huey wrote was that he was a racist, a violent racist, and as evidence, he cited 2 women that James Earl Ray had come into contact with, one in Canada, one in Mexico, thinking that if he didn't name them, then no one would ever find out who their names were, and so he could say anything he wanted to. So he made up bald-faced lies that each of them had told him stories that indicated he was a racist. I'm not going to go into the details, it's all in the book. But the point is, he lied about that, right. said that these women were portraying him as a vicious racist, when in fact, those women did come forward 10 years later with the House Select Committee and say that is untrue. He was not a racist. He never said those things. As a matter of fact, the one in Canada, here's a guy that just broke out of prison, wound up going to Montreal. By the way, 800 miles past Toronto. If he wanted to just go to Canada, why didn't he just stay in Toronto? But he drove this old broken down Plymouth right past Toronto to get to Montreal. That was because at McGill University in Montreal, that is a major CIA whatever.
He was a famous guy. Ewan Cameron was there, so he was a very
exactly.
well-known element. There's a book called The Sleep Room about that.
Yeah, and he was buddies with James Angleton, no less.
Wow.
And so this is all in the background, and that aspect came from another author named Philip Melanson. He did incredible work too. But the point I'm getting on that is that my book synthesizes what Philip Melanson said, what this John Emerson said, what William Pepper said. In fact, William Pepper's book, I believe, he's just did an incredible job. He actually wrote 3 books, but most of what I'm referencing came out of that last one, The Plot to Kill King, and that was not published until 2016. And as it worked out, that is precisely when I decided to start investigating this one. And so his book was just out, and I basically incorporated it almost by proxy as the basis, as the single biggest basis of my own book. Yet, as I mentioned, my book summarizes numerous other books, the good and the bad.
And you talk about some of the bad guys, who you consider Posner as a name, some of these other names that are very suspicious, and people have taken them apart, like, what's the professor from Berkeley? It's
Peter Dale Scott?
Peter Dale Scott, thank you.
Right. Yeah, William Bradford Huey, he wrote his book in 1970. That was a culmination of, after having written 3 articles for Look magazine, and each of those articles started betraying the trust that Ray had extended to him. In the meantime, he had entered this contract with Huey, basically to be paid by whatever monies that would be collected there. Some of that would be given to his attorney, and his original attorney was Arthur Haynes out of Birmingham, Alabama. And unfortunately, for Huey, well, let's put it this way: his first article had come out in early November, I think it was the 12th of 1969. That was exactly at the time when that when James Earl Ray had determined that he had betrayed, that Huey had betrayed him, that he was being set up, and that's when he decided to fire him after that first article appeared in Look magazine. Now it just happens that because the cell he was put in, it was converted so that there was no sunlight that would ever even come in at a little crack, under a crack. In other words, they sealed all the windows in this cell block, and they put all kinds of microphones, video cameras, CCTV type things. So he was monitored constantly, 24/7, 365, always monitored. And so they knew when he was speaking to his brothers or his previous lawyer or whomever, they were overhearing everything and recording it and sending all these reports back to Washington through the FBI to Hoover. So they knew exactly what was going on there. And they knew that he was telling his brothers that he had to fire Haynes to get rid of Huey. So he had to fire all of them and just get rid of them. That's what he did.
So they're all being done. And then at the same time, leading up to the assassination, the FBI is bugging MLK and putting him under psychological pressure. So there's that very important part that they're constantly spying on these people, right? The FBI.
Right. Yeah. But the other thing that happened there is that since they knew that he was ready to fire the Huey, that is Haynes and Huey, that now is the perfect time for Percy Foreman, big Texas famous attorney, to go into that jail and ask to see him and actually be shown right up to his. They took him right up there because they were ordered to through Hoover, FBI, and so on, in order to do that, because that is not something that you can do. An attorney can't just show up and for a person who's already represented, he hasn't fired this attorney yet. They can't be doing that, but that it was done. And so he got up there and he convinced James Earl Ray that yes, you should go ahead and move against Haynes, get rid of him. I'm the Texas Tiger, he called himself, and I've had 1,000 cases when only one guy ever got the electric chair or capital punishment, whatever, and out of 1,000. So yeah, he was famous for doing that. He was also famous among attorneys, especially in Texas, who knew him, that to do anything possible. It didn't matter if he had to suborn a jury or suborn a witness in order to get things done. That's what he did. And so I've written all about that in one of my blogs, from, I think 2018.
Right. So you have these attorneys, sketchy attorneys, and you mentioned Pepper. Can you explain to the audience the importance of, I think it's William Pepper?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, I should have expounded on that earlier, but William Pepper had gotten to be a friend of Martin Luther King back in the mid or early 60s. When he went to, that is, when Pepper went to Vietnam to review what was going on there as a journalist, he came back loaded with photographs of children, the Vietnam children, who were being slaughtered and abused and maimed, and made published an article in Ramparts magazine, and I can't remember exactly when that was. It was 65, I believe, 1965, and Martin Luther King saw that article in Ramparts. And that's what basically started turning him against the Vietnam War, that what was going on over there, and the effects not only on, draftees, especially black guys, being drafted and sent over there to fight in this ridiculous war that was supposed to be a civil war. And anyway, that's how they got to know each other and become friends. So he. For 10 years after the murder, he basically accepted the government thing that, yeah, they got this guy and so forth. Then he had his hands full with other stuff. So it wasn't until about 10 years later that he really took an interest in it and started pursuing it, and then started investigating and talking to a ton of people down there, and he wrote, as I said before, 3 books. The first one, I can't remember the dates of them, but it was like in the early 1980s, and then 1990, mid 90s, and then that book in 2016. 3 books, a decade apart.
But Pepper became friends with the family, and actually was part
Yes.
of that trial by Judge Joe Brown, right?
Right.
So
At that
civil
point, we're talking about, well, that all started in the later 90s, and so in 1997, he was already at work trying to get this done, while James Earl Ray was still alive. Well, he didn't quite make it because Ray died in 1998, and the trial was basically in 1999, and so Ray had already died at that point. But in the meantime, it was instructive, and people should consider the fact that the entire King family pretty much knew that the FBI was behind the murder of Martin Luther King, and that became almost official in 1997 when Dexter King was quoted in the New York Times that basically the FBI was behind it, and also Lyndon Johnson. So everything in my book conforms with what they were talking about at the time. Now, they haven't talked about it, however, in depth since the family matriarch passed away. Coretta Scott King, I think, died in the early 2010s or 2011, something like that. And sorry if since I can't remember exactly.
That's okay.
But at that point, evidently someone got to them and said, you got to, loosen up and not talk about everything so much anymore. And probably there were threats, financial kind of thing, maybe. I don't know what it happened. They haven't talked about it, and they haven't.
Interesting.
It basically effectively shut them up. But I don't have any reason to think that it really changed their minds.
Right, they've just kind of not as public as they can.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, I wanted to also get across the point that this William Bradford Huey, what he did in 1970, 69 and 70, is one thing. And then, and even in the files of the FBI that have been released, it really, there's evidence that they, in the form of Cartha DeLoach, set up Gerald Frank to write another book in 1972, and then George McMillan in 1976. And so all 3 of those, I believe, were choreographed by the FBI. I'm talking about William Sullivan and Cartha DeLoach, Clyde Tolson, and of course Hoover. So after that, now other people have come along and adopted the same kind of storylines that Huey had established. They've expanded on what Huey said, with more lies and deceits, and I've quantified all that within the book, and it had even extended into the 80s and 90s, and in 2010. The biggest authors, the most well-known authors that were in that lineup were Gerald Posner and then Hampton Sides in 2010. They took those same lies that Huey first published, and they repeated them and repeated through these other authors, and they not only did they repeat them, they upped the ante. So by the time the original story was basically saying that that is in Huey, Frank, and McMillan, we're saying that the way that James Earl Ray figured out where to go on the morning of April the 4th was by looking at the newspaper that morning, which indicated that he was staying in the Lorraine Motel unfortunately, that was never in that newspaper. All it said was that he had lunch in that hotel, in their cafeteria or the restaurant, whatever, the day before that. It didn't say that he was staying there, though. So they had no reason to think that he was. And in fact, he usually stayed at other hotels. He had never really stayed at the Lorraine, even though that got to be, stated over and over. And it was never the truth. And Pepper established that, and Pepper knew his friend Martin Luther King had never stayed there. He actually stayed usually in a place called the Rivermont Holiday Inn. So anyway, that's what was in the earlier books. However, Posner comes out and then he says that not only that, but there was a picture on the front page of that newspaper that showed the hotel and with the marking where the room was. And then along comes Posner, 15 years later in 2010, Posner extends it by saying, actually, he was shown in a picture that was taken right in front of the door, and you could see the number 306 right on the door. That's what is in his book. Check it out. Wow. But it's not true. None of that was true. And in fact, that original paper I have in the book, and there's not even a picture of anybody. There is an article on the front of that page. But that was just one of many, many lies that started back with William Bradford Huey. And it got expanded and expanded and extended. And so now it's sort of like in the, part of the meme that happened, but it never happened.
Right. I mean, that's really kind of the confusing element of this whole case, is what people never could get past these kind of these blizzard of lies by these books and authors out there confusing people. And it seems like it's pretty deliberate. I mean, there's a ton of information in this book, Philip. It's really detailed. It's long. You have a lot of appendices, citations. Is there anything you'd like to add? We're almost about an hour. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything I missed before we wrap up the discussion?
Yeah. The point that you were just referring to, I also have something in the last part of the book about how the effort is still very coordinated and controlled by somewhere in the bowels of the Washington bureaucracy. And it's evidenced by the fact that when the Lorraine Motel was renovated, that it was completely deconstructed. That is the interior, all the wood framing, under those or behind those brick walls. The only thing that remained, this was going on in 2012, 2013, that recently. But when they rebuilt it, supposedly they had to rebuild it to accommodate traffic. A lot of people walking through because of it turned into the National Civil Rights Museum.
Right.
So they put concrete floors on a steel superstructure, and that's what supported that second floor. But they stated that we're going to reconstruct 2 rooms there. The rest of it is wide open to allow the exhibits and so forth and so forth. But they reconstructed the bathroom, and they reconstructed the bedroom that James Earl Ray had stayed in or had rented. He never did wind up staying in it. But anyway, when they did that, they changed that bedroom around. Okay, actually, they changed the whole floor around. They raised the floor at least a foot. Okay, and there was a purpose in this, though. You have to see the pictures in the book to see what happened there, because in addition to raising the floor a foot, they moved the bathtub that was in that corner where the window was backwards. So there's 10 or 12 inches in between the end of it and the wall where the window is. So people in there now can go in and look and say, yeah, that makes sense. You can stand right there in front of the window with your gun and shoot.
Right, because at the time of the assassination, the assassin supposedly would have been sitting in the bathtub, right?
Yeah, well, shot, right? I mean, yeah, Harold Weisberg showed something that had been published in the Paris Match magazine about that, and it showed a guy in contortions trying to stand at the end of that bathroom on the slanted end, okay, with 1 foot on the ledge and the other at the bottom or whatever, and he was going sideways. He had to bend over all the way to his right in order to aim a gun down there, and it was an impossible thing. Harold Weisberg was the one who tore that thing apart. Well, now, and apparently for many years that there was this problem. They must have had a lot of people saying, well, how could someone stand there on that slanted end and have a shot, especially if he had to stay there very long to wait for Martin Luther King to show up on that balcony. Well, he didn't. I mean, that the rifleman was not even there. He was down on the ground, you know, but they had to, for some reason, they framed it that way so that it would reflect on the fact that he had gone in there and gotten that room and supposedly shot
James O'Reilly was there, right? Yeah, there's a lot of details. I highly recommend the book. It's titled again, "Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr." Where's the best place to get this book?
Well, it's in most bookstores, and of course Amazon, Books A Million, and Barnes and Noble. I track it basically, but I don't have much to do with it, except I do make available signed copies if people contact me through my website, which is LBJ The Master of Deceit.
And if people want to reach out to you, they can also do it through that website as well, correct?
Yes, there's a contact page there.
So I will put that in the show notes. And the website is www.lbjthemasterofdeceit, all one word.com. So people can check that out there. And again, the title of the book is "Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr.? The Case Against Lyndon B. Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover" by Phillip F. Nelson. So Phillip, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the
Take care.
opportunity.
All right, stay there. Stay there.